Hello and welcome back to Doge Watch, where if you give us about 15 minutes, we will give you the highlights of everything Doge has been up to for the previous week. And this one's been an interesting one because, quite frankly, the media and academia is absolutely flipping out about some of the cuts that have been made to NIH and higher education. Apparently, it's going to be the complete collapse of education as we know it. And today, what we're going to do is actually dive in on whether or not, that's true. Now, here's what's interesting. When I initially started researching for this, I did what I think most of us do. I went right into Google, I typed in Doge, Department of Education, figured that'd be a good place to start. And what did I get? Well, I just got one after the other of left-wing perspectives on this particular issue. In fact, I think I had to go to the second page before I got to anything that might be considered a right-wing perspective. And that's when I immediately went over to Ground News. And on Ground News, I can type in the same thing. Right off the bat, I got 354 articles curated for me, not to mention the fact that they're letting me know whether it comes from left, center, or a right-wing perspective. I can come get a summary right up here at the top, which is incredibly helpful. I can get coverage details. I can go down here to this nice little graph and get bias distribution. Not to mention the fact that I can go through and I can look from various perspectives just by clicking on it and going straight to the source in order to do additional analysis. That is the power of Ground News. Now, Ground News is a website and an app that gathers related articles in one place so you can compare headlines, helping you to understand not just what's happening, but who's telling the story and why. And if you're interested in Doge, they've even got a topic page that consolidates all articles related to what Doge is doing. So if, like us, you are somewhat frustrated with the way typical search engines curate the news where you only get one perspective, go over to ground.news/Doge and check out all of the different features they provide. In fact, if you go over right now to ground.news/Doge, you can get 40% off the Vantage plan, which will give you access to all the features you need to keep track of everything that is going on. Get 40% off of Ground News Vantage plan, which gives you unlimited access to their website when you go to, once again, ground.news/Doge. Go check it out. So now that we got a good place to get our information, let's go ahead and dive in and see what we discovered. Now, first of all, you can expect what to expect from places like CBS News, right? Government expert on Elon Musk and Doge's slash and burn exercise. I really like this one from Axios, where Axios is saying universities feel ripple effects of Doge cuts to health. Now, keep in mind what that headline says, right? Doge cuts to health, right? You almost feel like a little bit like you might be getting manipulated. Here's why Axios says it matters. Capping how much National Institutes of Health covers the school's overhead costs could lead to billions of dollars in cuts to scientific research funding and widespread economic fallout. Gee, I wonder why that is. Driving the news, an economic analysis by software company Implant on Tuesday estimates the proposed cuts could lead to a loss of $6.1 billion in the nation's gross domestic product and $4.6 billion reduction in labor income as a result in the loss of more than 46,000 jobs nationwide. So apparently Axios seems to be implying through this study that was done by Implant that if these sorts of cuts go through, we're going to lose billions of dollars in GDP and tens of thousands of jobs as a result. So maybe we should dive in a little bit closer to what some of these funds actually are going toward, right? Well, if we go over to the Department of Government Efficiency X page, today, NIH canceled the following grants: $620,000 for an LGB plus inclusive teen pregnancy prevention program for, wait for it, transgender boys. That's right. $699,000 for studying cannabis use among sexual minority gender diverse individuals. $740,000 for examining social networks among Black and Latino sexual minority men in New Jersey. $50,000 for assessing sexual health among LGBTQ plus Latinx youth in an agricultural community. $75,000 for researching structural racism. And it doesn't stop there because, ladies and gentlemen, the universities are really upset by this, right? It's exactly as Axios said. If we cut programs like this, how will these universities be able to survive? I mean, the University of Illinois, Illinois' research already suffering from federal funding cuts and Doge. And let's face it, whenever we're seeing these Doge cuts, it's not just about the larger economy. The real victims here are higher ed. So let's look at what higher ed was spending our tax dollars on. Well, according to the Department of Government Efficiency X, again, other grant examples from NIH. So these are NIH grants, National Institutes of Health, going to higher education for critical research that is absolutely just, We can't go without this stuff, guys. What would we do if we didn't give Vanderbilt University $100,000 to study social networks among sexual and gender minorities? Or how about $37,000 for University of Houston to study fear of deportation in Latinx young adults? $681,000 for the University of Pennsylvania to study social media anti-vaping messages among sexual and gender minority teens? Or $225,000 for the University of Colorado to study the effects of hormones on headaches in transmasculine adolescents? Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, this is what higher ed is spending your money on, right? And you'll notice something here, right? There's an ideological bent to all of this. It's not like they're doing, generalized studies that could probably be beneficial for a variety of populations. No. It's always focused in a particular group, in a particular setting with a particular message. And you just know how this analysis is really taking place. They have come to a conclusion about how something impacts a particular group which they have identified as being marginalized or oppressed. And now they're going to gather all the data in order to confirm their bias. Now, let me ask you something. If this was really just like cutting edge stuff, if this was stuff that was just such an enormous need within the population of the United States, don't you think they'd be able to find private sector funds to be able to do this? I think they probably would. But no, they're relying on your tax dollars. And again, not to conduct research that I think the vast majority of us might conclude was beneficial to society, but no, it's beneficial to their ideological objectives. And this has been one of the common themes we've seen throughout all of Doge. So much of the funding that we have seen that are coming from our tax dollars are not focused on anything that could be considered a legitimate function of government or what the Constitution might even categorize as the general welfare. Nope. It is about financing left-wing ideological projects which have the dual benefit of A, pushing their ideological agenda, and B, making sure that all of their buddies have lucrative jobs in fields that would never exist if it was actually dependent on people voluntarily giving them their money, as opposed to politicians confiscating it and then redistributing it to them. But it gets worse, because if you look more at this, let's look at some of these universities. Let's look at some of these universities crying and screaming that they absolutely have to have these federal dollars, right? Here's Vanderbilt. This is a chart of Vanderbilt's overall growth in their endowments. So what you'll see is they're sitting on a $10 billion endowment for Vanderbilt. $10 billion. Now, let's be intellectually honest, right? A lot of endowments have very specific purposes associated with them. Now, here's what you generally notice. A lot of times when it comes to endowments, they'll be focused on anything from maybe trying to reduce tuition rates, or maybe trying to help a particular group, or maybe conducting a particular field of scientific or health-related research. This is why you get things like cancer centers donated by a particular donor, and their name goes on the side of the building, which, you know what? That's great. That's wonderful. That is a private citizen using their money to fund a particular type of research that they think is really important or maybe has impacted their lives. And I don't think anybody has a problem with that. But if you look at all the research that was actually being done in those last grants, that's not a private donor donating to something they think is really critical. That's the government taking our money to push it in a particular ideological direction. Now, it's not just Vanderbilt, right? I'm not just cherry picking here. Let's go to University of Houston. They've also got a multi-billion-dollar endowment. Let's go over here to Penn State, $22.3 billion as of June 30th, 2024. But if they don't get more of your tax dollars, well, the entire economy is going to collapse, and you just hate higher education. Then we got Colorado University. They're sitting on part of a $2.8 billion assets, and the list goes on. The list goes on. Now, keep in mind, at the same time that these universities are A, sitting on multi-billion-dollar endowments, and B, getting billions of dollars, hundreds of millions to billions of dollars in your tax dollars, funding things like education and health research, and then sending it all off to these ideologically, imposed programs, they are begging the state for more money and then encouraging the federal government to increase federal student loans. Now, if we look at the total debt associated with federal student loans right now, here's what we find. And this comes from the Education Data Initiative Student Loan Debt Statistics. Student loan debt in the United States totals $1.777 trillion. Annual growth resumed in 2024 following a year-over-year decline in 2023. The outstanding federal student loan balance is $1.693 trillion. 42.7 million student borrowers have federal loan debt. Now, here's the part you need to understand. The same universities that are spending billions of dollars pushing an ideological agenda, the same universities that spend millions of dollars lobbying federal and state governments in order to increase their share of your tax dollars. These are the same universities that went out and encouraged not only the federal government to establish a very, very dubious federal loan system, where essentially the federal government is just giving people money to go to college without asking important questions like, gosh, what are you majoring in? Is what you're majoring in likely to set you up for enough economic success to be able to pay back your college loans? No, they're not asking any of that. And the universities don't care because they get their cut. They get their cut, right? And then what happens? Well, you got a bunch of students with economically worthless degrees that are strapped with all this student loan. And then what do the lobbyists for higher education do? Oh, well, they show up and they advocate to forgive federal student loans. Let me ask you something. Can you forgive a loan that you didn't pay? No, you can't. The federal government can't forgive student loans. All they can do is transfer the debt from the person that took on the loan to somebody who didn't take on the loan. There's nothing fair. There's nothing equitable about that. And yet that's what they're doing. And the universities are all here for it. Why? Because they already got their money. Right? They're advocating. They advocated to steal your tax dollars in order to get loans to put people through their programs at the same time where they were drastically increasing their administrative staff and drastically increasing the number of degree programs that had no economic viability, right? They did all of this in tandem, and now they're going back and they're advocating for you to pick up the bill for the federal loans that they advocated for. Again, because they already got their cut. If you weren't already frustrated enough, just know that they're continuing to go to their state legislators. They're continuing to go to the federal legislators in order to ask for more. And they are not asking for a little bit here and there. In fact, we got this one article from Inside Higher Ed. Congress sends $1.3 billion to colleges in federal earmarks. That's April 3rd, 2024. I've seen this firsthand in the state legislature in Virginia, where you have working families that are struggling to pay tuition, working families that are struggling to pay for groceries. You got parents taking out a second mortgage to send their kids to college. And then I watch there as legislators get up and brag about how much money they took from their constituents and gave to higher ed, so higher ed could then develop a bunch of programs that would essentially teach their children to hate the very parents that are working so hard to send them to college in the first place. And higher ed has been laughing all the way to the bank. So you know what? I'm just not concerned anymore. It's not because I don't like the concept of higher education. It's not because I don't think people should constantly seek and find out ways to improve their education on a variety of topics, which are both socially beneficial and economically beneficial. But what we have right now is a racket. And the reason why the left is flipping out so much about it is because when we look at Gramsci's Long March Through the Institutions, right? When we look at what this ideological push was, it was to take over culturally shaping institutions. And one of the most culturally shaping institutions is education, whether it be your public school system or whether it be higher ed. And what we have come to discover, just like we've discovered with NGOs, just like we've discovered with all these nonprofits, just like we've discovered with the bureaucracy in general, the reason why the world seems to have just stood on its head so quickly, the reason why over the last decade or so, we're looking around going, what the heck happened to our country? What we find out is that the federal government was taking our dollars to fund their ideological objectives. And they did it primarily within the education system. And they created this loop. Again, it's not just bad enough that they were taking our money to push an ideological agenda. They were also doing it at the same time that they were enriching themselves because it was their buddies that were getting the increased pay at universities. It was their buddies that was getting the research grants. It was their buddies setting up the NGOs. It was their buddies setting up the nonprofits. And they didn't have to pay for it themselves. They got to use our money to do it. So whenever the media comes out and just laments and attempts to scare us all about how horrible it is, like, oh my gosh, they're going to go in and cut it. No. Go look for yourself on what they're actually doing, because what you're going to find out is this spending was ridiculous. It is completely and totally unjustifiable when you have a university sitting on billions of dollars worth of endowments, already getting billions of dollars worth of money from the government, already getting billions of dollars worth of tuition, and then using that money directly against our own ideological preferences as highlighted by the last election results. So I'm going to say right now, just like I've said in pretty much every episode, I am sure there are going to be times where Doge makes mistakes, where maybe they cut things that they shouldn't have cut. In fact, Elon Musk has already said that. He said, look, we're not going to be perfect, but when we make a mistake, we'll try to go back and correct it. But what you see, the constant drumbeat from the media, predominantly from the left, is that anytime you cut something from the Department of Education, they don't care what the individual line items were that you're cutting. They don't care that there's actually nothing in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution that is supposed to give the federal government power over education. They don't care about any of this because it wasn't about education. It was about fueling an agenda. And the more power they lose to take your money and then redistribute it to their ideological allies, the worse off they are because, quite frankly, these ideas don't stand on their own. They require forced subsidization. So the more Doge can cut from these various institutions, the better off we're all going to be. And by the way, to Axios and Implant, who conducted this study that suggests that we're all going to lose billions of dollars, when you cut federal funding, it doesn't mean the dollars just go away or disappear into the ether. It means now money can be reallocated to something people actually want, be it a legitimate function of government, be it a tax cut, be it paying down the debt. We can actually start paying for things that we need to pay for instead of whatever the latest ideological trend is coming out of the sociology department at Cal Berkeley. So once again, Doge, good job. Keep it up. And for the rest of us, this is the sort of information we need to be sharing with our friends because there's a lot of people, they're not going to be watching this program. They might not be watching what's going on or any sort of analysis. They're not digging in any deeper. They're seeing a headline from Axios. They're seeing a headline from CBS, and it looks just oh so scary. When in reality, if you show them what is specifically being cut, they look at it, and the first response they usually give you is disbelief. That can't be true. But it is true, and it's been true for a while. And the more we expose people to that truth, the more they will recognize just how badly they have been getting ripped off by institutions they thought they could trust. Once again, I'm Nick Freitas for Doge Watch. Thank you very much for watching. Go check out Ground News, and we'll see you next episode.